everybody, my name is Victoria Moore and I'm here today to give you 5 tips and strategies to deal with grief. Tip number 1. Grief is a normal and natural reaction to loss. Everybody thinks usually that grief, there's something wrong with you, that's something that needs fixing, whereas grief is a completely normal and natural reaction to loss. After my heart is broken, after something has happened to me, it's perfectly normal for me to walk around feeling dazed and confused, for me to be forgetting where I'm going, for my energy levels to be less than what they are normally. All of these things are a completely healthy, normal reaction to loss. Grief is intensely painful and it's a horrible thing to go through, but that is the way it is meant to be so. What is not normal is the people around you and their reaction to you during your heartbreak and loss. Everybody around you usually tries to fix you, usually has all sorts of things to say to you. A lot of those things are usually actually unhelpful. A lot of surveys that have been done through my training with grief and through other organisations, it's been proven that a lot of the things that people heard in the early days after a death or a heartbreak have been unhelpful, and a very small percentage have been helpful. So tip number 1 is just to remember that grief is a normal and natural reaction to loss. Number 2, no time limits. There are no time limits in which you are supposed to have done with your grieving, for your grieving to be over. You have to follow specific actions in order to get better, in order to move beyond your pain and your loneliness and your isolation around your loss. But there are no time constraints. A lot of the time, after a loss has occurred, and once again our heart could be shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces and we could be bleeding internally from the pain that we're going through. This could be from death of a loved one, it could be from a divorce, it could be from the breakup of a romantic partner. Now, what you're expected to do a lot of the time is just to be able to go back to work after a set period, usually about a week, maybe 2 weeks bereavement leave from work. Go back to your desk and perform normal functions. Now, as part of the heart re-education program that I'm involved in, one of the things that we teach is that time does not heal and there are no time limits. You actually have to take specific actions. Is it normal? Once again, is it normal for us to go back to our desk and be fully functioning in a week or 2 after a massive heartbreak? No, it's not. Is it unreasonable for people to think so? Yes. Do they usually know that they're being unreasonable? No. Tip number 2, there are no time limits, so please try and remember not to put any pressure on yourself, but to follow specific actions in which to get better and move beyond your pain and your loss. Tip number 3, no fixing. This is a big one. When you're walking around with a broken heart, a lot of the time, people always want to fix you. They have very good intentions at heart and they have good things for you in their minds. And they'll usually try and tell you things to try and make you feel better. Grief and heartbreak is an emotional problem. It's a problem within our hearts. So trying to fix our heart with our head does not work. A lot of the time we'll try and tell ourselves certain things, and this might work temporarily. We might get distracted and start believing what we're telling ourselves. And after a period of time, sometimes days, weeks and months, we'll begin to realise that our energy is altering and that things just aren't feeling the same, and we can't kind of get control of our lives again or have any joy. Now, you're not meant to feel joyous all the time. One of the issues here with no time limits as well is that happy and sad are 2 ends of the same spectrum. If I was walking around happy and had great news, I would call a friend or I'd go around telling people, hey, guess what's happened to me today, and tell them the good news, and my friends would all be very pleased to hear that. Now, if I have a heartbreak and I'm very upset, would I call my friends? A lot of the time people don't. What people tend to do is to keep it to themselves, stay inside, maybe try and talk to someone. Inevitably, when we do talk to people, sometimes we get the fixing. People will tell us certain things. We might find them helpful, like I said, through the research that's been done. Usually they're not very helpful. So we tend to label sad as bad, and we tend to think that if we cry then people are going to react, we have to apologise for tears, and all of these things that actually are not true and don't make any sense. So no fixing at all, and try and remember that what you're feeling is normal and a natural reaction to loss. What I'm trying to do is to tell you here that there are specific actions that you need to take in order to recover and move on from your pain and loneliness, and a lot of the time isolation after a loss or a heartbreak. Tip number 4. Now, a lot of the things that we learn about grief and loss, we've learnt about since a child. Everything that we've learned goes back to here, goes back to when we were small. Now, as you grow up, we obviously witness and observe everything that our parents are showing us and teaching us. Not only our parents, but society, our elders, movies that we go and see. We're very influenced about how people deal with grief. And how they're reacting to it, and we kind of relay those messages and put them into our own practice. Now, just going back to parental evidence and what they're doing to influence us. Now, obviously our parents have got the best will in the world for us. They bring us up as best they can, and they're just passing down from their parents what they were taught about grief. And there's a lot of misinformation about grief and how to recover from pain and loss. I know when I was growing up, there was a lot of death in my family. My grandparents were all pretty much dead by the time I was about 7 or 8, and I had one of my cats die as well when I was quite young, and I loved my cats so much. And I had observed my mum and my dad go through grief very silently. I know that when my father and my mother's parents died, there wasn't very much reaction to that. There certainly wasn't any discussion, and I watched my mum and my dad grieve alone. Now, the generation, obviously the society thing of being English, it was very much a stiff upper lip and kind of just get on. It was very stoical. Now, I observed that, and what I tended to do before I entered the field of becoming an expert on grief was copy my parents. So when something happened to me, I tended to hold on to it, to grieve alone. If I did try and venture and talk to some friends that I trusted, a lot of the time they would tell me that they knew how I felt, which obviously nobody can know how I feel, only I know how I feel. My relationships are unique to me, just everybody's relationships are unique to them. So my friends would obviously then try, and if that didn't work, they'd try and use other things, usually intellectual things with which to help me deal with my heartbreak. And you can't, as I said before, you cannot treat the heart with the head. The two just do not go together. I'm having a heartbreak and I need an emotional response. I need to take specific action with which to get better. If I had cut my arm quite badly and it was quite deep and I was bleeding, would I, for example, just watch it and do nothing and just hopefully wait for my blood platelets to start healing my arm? Well, no, I'd go and clean it out, I'd go and get a plaster, put the plaster on, and I would wait for it to get better. Now, if my heart's bleeding and I'm in pain and suffering inside with my broken heart, why would I just kind of hopefully wait for that to get better? It's the same thing, it's just that it's on the inside. So what we need to do is to take specific actions with which to recover. Now, as you see, I've got here, write down what you have seen. So tip number 4, I want you just to take a little while and just go back to the main losses that were in your life and to try and remember the things that you saw your parents do, or whoever brought you up. So it could be your grandparents or other members of your family. How you saw them deal with grief. So maybe your dad lost his job, or your mum might have, if you had any younger sisters, might have had a miscarriage, or your grandparents could have died, or your dog or your cat might have died. What were you told by them at the time? Try and go back and remember. But most of all, how did you see them deal with grief? Did you go and want to hug them? Did you want to go and talk to them? Did they very much tell you, no, I'm going to my room? Did you observe, like me, my mum kind of shutting herself off and going to her room as a reaction to the loss. In which case, of course, as I said to you at the beginning of tip number 4, it was something that I very much did, was to copy my parents and isolate and grieve alone. These had a very detrimental effect on me as I went on into my later years. So I want you to, for tip number 4, just take a little while and write down what you saw your parents do, and maybe see if there's any link to what you're doing. Now this could be other things, it doesn't have to be isolation. There are other things that people do. They'll try and maybe replace the loss. Maybe your parents bought you new things, or you saw your parents buy new things if they lost it, for example. Did they replace your dog? Did they replace a dog or a cat immediately after the death of one? Did you see your parents rage? And did you see your parents, what did you see them do? So just make a note and then just have a look at what it is that you do. Because I bet you what you tend to do is what you have seen your parents do. And we just need to ask ourselves, does that serve me still? Is that still helping me move beyond my grief and to have a joy in my life and live from my heart space? Tip number 5, the final tip and strategy, is timeline of loss. Now, grief is cumulative and cumulatively negative. And what we mean by that is that grief compounds grief. So as I go through my life and I have one particular heartbreak, and then I go on to another heartbreak and another one, there are over 43 different losses that people can go through at any one time, from pet loss to moving multiple amounts of time, to losing a job, to financial problems, to romantic breakups. So there are over about 43 different losses. Now, as I say to you, as we go through life, our grief becomes cumulative. So as the next grief happens to us, it's not a fresh grief from now, it tends to be from before going forward. So what tends to happen is, as we go through our lives, our latest heartbreaks can affect us much more profoundly, because we're also carrying with us all of our losses and griefs from our past. So what I want you to do is, for tip number 5, do a timeline of loss. Now, I want you to do this just by taking a sheet of A4 paper, putting a line down the middle of the page, put the date that you were born and today's date at the end of it. And I want you to just take half an hour or an hour of your time and go back. Now, you'll know, because you'll always record all our losses, but you've probably just never seen them written down before. So go through all of your losses one by one, write them down, and then get a friend who you trust to listen to you, and just ask them to listen to you, to not talk, not to comment, not to touch you or interfere while you're talking, and just talk out loud all of your losses and the little story around each loss from the beginning right to the end. The usual amount of losses is about 10-15 losses, so try and make sure there's around that many losses so that you know that you're not cutting yourself short. Good, okay, that's me, Victoria Moore, and I hope that these 5 tips and strategies will really help you to start with on seeing how you might be able to move beyond the pain, the loss and the grief in your own lives. Thank you, bye-bye.